Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard, joining you as always on our Thursday podcast that we love to release. At the time of recording right now, it is 2024. However, when we release this podcast, it's just before Christmas as we're talking. When we release this podcast, it will be 2025. What I wanted to do is speak to a few influencers, people that are interesting in the market about their kind of thoughts for 2025, particularly in a HR space. And that's why I've got my guest today. It's a duet today. It's myself and Idris Arshad, who is a HR influencer. He is a HR leader. He works for an organisation called Asthma Lung UK. He's been a lecturer. He talks on the HR circuit. He does a little bit of everything. Idris, great to have you on today, mate. How you doing?
Chris, thank you for having me on. Brilliant. Thank you.
Idris, we're going to do a little bit of future thinking into 2025 because I know that you are very vocal on LinkedIn. You put some really interesting thoughts. We originally started talking about the autumn budget, as we were just saying in the green room beforehand, but I wanted to get your take on what's big for HR next year. Let's go future thinking, futurologist style. We're going to get into that. Before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And also, let's talk a little bit about Asthma Lung UK.
Brilliant. Yeah. So myself, aside from the good declaration you gave me at the beginning, very much so been HR through and through, mostly in the charity sector, bar a year in the local council. Aside from the things you've mentioned and what I do, I enjoy a bit of football outside of work. I don't play terribly well, but I manage it twice a week. I've got 3 little kids and a lovely wife running around as well. That's me in a nutshell.
Tell me a little bit about Asthma Lung UK and the work that you guys do.
Brilliant work. I always say to people, anyone that you know who's got asthma or lung condition, give us a call. We've got clinicians on the other end of a helpline, but we do other work around raising awareness around asthma and lung conditions as well. So we do a lot of influencing, and on that sphere, we've got a research arm as well, where we do and fund a lot of research to do with asthma and lung conditions. And it's just, as every charity, is a really good cause and really trying to help people in need. For me, it's one of the many good charities doing a lot of good work, and it's a real privilege to be there.
Cool. What we'll do is we'll put a link to Asthma Lung UK in the show note for anybody that wants to find out a little bit of information. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of 2025 predictions. But before we do that, fundamentally different question. I've decided to keep it themed, actually. Normally, I go completely random based on a weird story that I read in the last week. But I'm going to go New Year's resolution. Do you believe in them? Yes or no, I guess is the first question. And if you do, have you got a New Year's resolution you could share with our wonderful listeners?
I think the first memory comes from schools. You do it before the end of term or start a new term. It was, what's your New Year's resolution? That was at primary school. I don't think it ever leaves us because naturally, the end of a year, you think of end and you think of new beginning. And it just, what we see around us, it just all gets towards that. Our workplaces tend to shut down towards the end of the year. So we all start to think about next year. And then when the new year kicks in, we're like, right, it's new. Do I have to do something new? So do I believe in them? I'm more of a believer in change at any time, to be honest. But for myself, you do naturally think, I did a post just today about reflections and end of 2024 highlight. But what you find is that the new year comes and goes really quickly. And then after that, you realize actually a lot's changed. And what my new year resolution was is now something completely different. But I've said to myself, probably a simple one is make next year better than this year. And that's a bit generic. It's a bit cheesy, but it's safe that I can't break it easily and forget about it. But no, I think it's that natural thing that we all tend to think about. So I do think it's a good thing to do. And there's a lot of good initiatives geared around January. You've got Dry January and a lot of things where people want to mark change. But I'm a believer of change at any point in the year as well.
I really like that. Can we just explore that a little bit as we segue into this kind of looking into next year? One of the things that we've been talking about internally at Lace is that, so we call ourselves a HR transformation consultancy, but transformation, from what I've been seeing in my 5 years at Lace from when I joined, it feels like transformation for HR and for businesses in general, particularly post-pandemic, feels like that's BAU. It's business as usual because we're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving. Do you think that's something that HR embraces as a general kind of mindset and concept, this idea of, well, we constantly have to evolve. And do you think it's linked to that sort of post-pandemic, or do you think that's just something that you've seen from just when you turn up at the conference circuit and you speak to other HR professionals? Do you think we embrace that as a function as much as perhaps other functions?
I see it in two ways. I see one way that the word transformation is the go-to word of the last few years, and people are now starting to talk about HR transformation. The word we're more used to is probably change, and we'll say change management or culture change. I think that's more going to be something that people are more closely aligned with. I do find that the word, you mentioned BAU, what timeframe does transformation have and change have? You could argue the world we live in is changing all the time. I mean, you go back 5 years, there was no pandemic. And through the pandemic, the world changed and no one saw it coming. Let's be honest, 2018, no one saw a pandemic coming. And so what I do find is you get those seismic changes that force us to change as well. But when it comes to transformation, we need to get a better hold of it and really lay out what HR can do in that sphere. More often than not, you tend to find your tech strategy people leading transformation because of the nature of transformation involves systems. People tend to run to IT and say, you need to lead us on this. But it can sit anywhere. It can sit with finance. It can sit with tech. It can sit with HR. But I think we've all got to add what our value is in that. It's all good about HR leading it, but what are HR going to do in transformation? Where can you add value and what can you bring to the table? Whether you're looking at transformation or not, you're going to have to do it in one way or another. This day and age, those organizations who aren't moving with the times digitally, operationally, or by their sector often get left behind. And I think if we're not moving with the times, there's been a lot of talk around AI this year, and it hasn't really hit as I thought it would. But if we don't embrace those changes, young people are flocking to TikTok for the news. Things like that are telling us that we need to start changing. And if we don't, at one point, we're going to be losing out. So to answer the question, I think we need to do more to demonstrate our value within transformation. But I also feel we need to be clear on how we can help others when we're not leading it and what the people impact is. And that's often the question in transformation. What about people? And that's where we come in. But it is one of those where it's, for me, a buzzword. I don't mind buzzwords as long as they're clearly defined with everyone involved. That's the key bit I often find. Sometimes transformation gets really lost and it's like, well, what are we doing again? Transformation. Yeah. Oh, but what does that look like? So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I really, really like that. I'd just like to pick at that a little bit more, if that's all right, because one of the things we are doing at Lace Partners is we are, and we were just talking about this just before we hit record, we are going to launch a campaign which is focused on business-wide transformation. So why doesn't HR as a function become more front and center when it comes to business-wide transformation, as opposed to HR looking insular at itself, at its own department, at its own function, and saying, what do we need to do? What new HR tech do we need to implement? What processes, what HR operating model do we need to change? One of the things that we've been kicking around internally over the last 6 to 12 months, but we're now going to turn it into a campaign in 2025, is around HR pushing itself to be the driving force behind business-wide transformation. And you were talking about IT can be involved, finance and marketing can be involved. But I wanted to just get your views on how ready you think HR professionals are, perhaps from a capability point of view. We're going to take this because people is the biggest expense that most organizations have, salaries and office space. Because people are the most expensive resource, that's why, as a people function or a HR function, we need to be leading any kind of business-wide transformation. So I wanted to get some general takes on that. Just one final bit before I let you give me some thoughts is we talked about this in a white paper we did in 2019. So pre-pandemic, we talked about HR has to step out of the shadows. Now, the context back in 2019 was if HR wants a seat at the top table, if it wants to be seen as operating at a more strategic level, if it doesn't want to be transactional, I go to HR because I've got a problem with my line manager, or I go to HR if I've got a problem with my employees, and it's a very transactional relationship. They need to be more forward thinking, looking forward as how is our profession evolving? How do we get the most out of our people? So what's your view on HR's capability to lead a business-wide transformation?
I'd pitch that at two bits, and one is going to be that traditional HR business partner role. Because what I find, if that role is being done to what it's meant to be doing, you're working with teams, not just on the day-to-day firefighting, but on the future, kind of, what's your next 6 months? Actually, we've had a change in direction because of changes in the market. We need to go less digital, for example. When the business partner role comes in, business transformation, because they're partnering with the business. So what the business needs, they will help shape from a people perspective. That's the way I think it needs to work. Organization sectors partners have different definitions of what a business partner should do, but then also the reality kicks in of what they're actually doing. There's various levels. You've got some business partners that are acting as advisors and not having the opportunity to business partner. And you've got the other end of the spectrum where there's people strategically partnering, doing fantastic work within the organization to transform those teams ultimately. The next bit I'll speak about is what's obvious from a professional point of view, the realm of organizational development and design as a specialism. That speaks to business transformation as much as anything else. What is difficult is trying to get that it's almost what I call the science behind HR, your system design, your structures, and really how you develop the organization. Getting the organization to understand that you're now having an impact beyond just we give advice, we partner. You're now looking to say, well, if you run these meetings in this way, how about doing it in this way? You bring in some neuroscience, you bring in some learning. You've now really stepped away from the traditional HR sense, and you're looking at things from a very scientific and systems-based point of view and a structural point of view. And I would say that's the key when it comes to business-wide transformation. There's some great organizations out there that have got specialists in organizational design and development, and they're doing this work, but it's not common. Mostly our departments will go to business partnering, where OD is like an add-on, really, a luxury if you get there. But that organizational design and development piece for me is the key to business transformation. You get that right. Imagine setting up your structures in such a way, your systems, your cultures, your ways of working in such a way that it allows people to be productive, people to feel included, people to feel engaged. You're hitting the heights that you want to hit. And that's the value we can add as HR. It's not just about the organization, it's about us as well. We need to propel ourselves to that level, but we need the organization to help us and leverage us as well. For me, that's the key. As I said, you'll find good case studies out there, fantastic ones. There was one that comes to mind years ago in the NHS. They did an OD&D program. They detailed kind of what the issue was, what they did, and was really good at doing that. So there's definitely good examples out there, but we've got generally a lot of catching up to do in that field.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one, because I'm going to ask you about what you think some of the big ticket items are, because I'm quite interested to get your view on that. How ready do you think HR is as a broad profession to take on that mantle and to be as forward-looking as you just talked about with the OD stuff? How ready do you think they are to adopt that mindset?
I think you need that perfect mix of ingredients. You need the right HR person at the helm. You need the right organization that takes HR seriously enough to involve them in the right places and the right decisions. And then you need that continuing relationship where they work together. When you have that, there's so many good examples of where it's working. You've got some really fantastic places doing fantastic HR work. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum where you see issues of HR burnout, organizations getting involved and in the firing line for when things go really, really wrong in organizations. You see the good, you see the not so good, and you see the bad. But what we've got to do is try and help each other. Ultimately, we've got to try and leverage up. I think the root of those problems lie in the very basics of what we don't do. So when the organization's growing, we're probably the last to say, actually, we may need to look at ourselves and see what development we need, what resource we need. And then we need to speak up when things aren't going so well and not just take it and go, no, we can't say anything. So I think there's work for us to do in that sphere and actually make sure that we're not in that situation where we're burnt out, when we're just firefighting and we're just ultimately not providing any value to the organization. So it's a spectrum that you get, and different sectors are at different spaces when it comes to it. Some are still holding on to kind of traditional ways of doing HR and can't let go culturally. What you're definitely seeing now is there's really no excuse. There's plenty of solutions out there. There's ways of getting through no matter what crisis you're in. I think it takes a lot to get through them, but we need to ask help. We need to be helping each other out in the profession, sharing good knowledge, and it's out there. But ultimately, we need the organizations to give us a helping hand and say, look, we see you struggling. What do you need? And to kind of get back to normal. And we need that. Where you leave any function, whether it's HR, finance, whatever function, marketing, whatever function is, if you leave them to it without help, they're going to struggle. It's a broad spectrum of things. I tend to focus on the good and the hope that we're all at different spaces and journeys, and we need to make sure we're just getting better at what we've been doing.
Love it. Absolutely love that. Now, we are towards the end of December at the time of recording this, and about a month ago, you were starting to think ahead at 2025. You put some stuff on LinkedIn around areas that you want to focus on. You mentioned in design. You've also mentioned AI as well. From what you're seeing, you also talked about people analytics, reward and benefits too. From what you've been seeing since that month and the conversations that you're having, what are the kind of big things that you've been speaking to people about that seems to be the big thing in 2025?
I think that AI is not going to go away. I think that's always going to be lingering until something really shifts in government legislation or regulation. I think with the budget announcement, two clear things come out, recruitment being one of them. It is on top of everyone's agenda. Linked to that, what hasn't gone away for a long while is that almost fight for talent, really making sure you get the best people in. That is, I think, as tough as it's ever been. We hear recent stories around ghosting from employers and employees, 6-stage processes, and hearing at the end of it, they didn't have the experience. But that fight for talent is a big one. No matter where you are, we're all doing that. We're all trying to find that best person to fill that role. And it's incredibly difficult. We're relying on that one person seeing your advert, putting on a good performance, us shortlisting them right and selecting them. It's requiring a lot just for that one person to happen. So I think the fight for talent is a big one next year, no matter where you are or what sector you're in. In times when budgets are squeezed, learning tends to take an unappreciated hat sometimes. So I think learning for me is a big one. It can, again, from a business point of view, learning is your competitive advantage. You get that right, you can really leverage yourself above your competition. So I'm a big fan of learning and continuous learning as well. And the third thing I think is quality, diversity and inclusion. That's really gone 180 in one respect. You had obviously what happened during and pre-pandemic around the Me Too movement, George Floyd murder, Black Lives Matter, and then this big encouragement and push that everyone started really focusing on EDI initiatives, so chief diversity officers. Then what we've seen more recently is the cull of EDI roles being removed. When it comes to tougher financial times, the decisions that get made of what gets cut, usually it's around the well-being and inclusion space, unfortunately. So I think that is going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on. And even if you do nothing around the area, you're going to have to address well-being and equality, diversity, inclusion issues in your organization. And it's a choice whether you choose to work proactively with it or you choose to ignore it. But either way, it's not going to go away. So I think that would be the third one for me, just to keep an eye on how that changes with what happens around us and within our organizations.
Yeah, and if you think about generations entering the workforce, we've seen lots of studies. I could probably spend 5 minutes looking on LinkedIn and reference a number of research reports talking about their desires they don't just want a transactional relationship from their employers anymore. They want to believe in what they're doing. There's an element of businesses needing to be brave. You just talked about that's the first thing that could be cut because people are just looking at it and thinking, where's the ROI here? But do you think there's an element of businesses need to be brave because it's actually going to support their talent attraction processes, particularly from an employee value? If you're able to say as an employer, look, we really value this. This is how we value this. We're not just doing this as a quick movement and then we're going to move back from it. We really believe in this. That gives you a leg up for people who are entering the workforce thinking, do you know what? That's an organization that the culture, their values align to my own. It can be that, I don't want to say USP because so many businesses are so good at that, but it is an element of organizations recognizing that this will help us in our talent attraction processes. It's not just about get good tech in, it's good applicant tracking systems and what have you. It's believing in this sort of stuff around the EDI space as well, right?
Absolutely. When you do anything around EDI and well-being, it's got to be intentional. You've got to have the right intentions to do it. If you're going to do it because it looks good on us, you're going to at one point very quickly fail. The intention's got to be right from a human point of view more than anything, because what you'd want for yourself is what you'd want for others. You want a good experience at work. So the intention matters a lot, and that's what drives you. When things get difficult in the workplace, especially around issues relating to well-being and EDI, the intention helps to push you through and say, actually, we have to do the right thing. Where you don't have that intention, you fall flat. When issues get hard and when you have to make difficult and ethical decisions, that's where it gets difficult. So I think it's a thing that you have to continue doing. There's never a stop to it. It's a continuing thing. And there are 5 different generations who have learnt differently, been educated differently, come from different backgrounds and experiences, all in one setting. The challenge is, how do you make sure everyone is respected and can contribute? And not only that, has a voice, feels engaged, is rewarded, all of that. That's the challenge, really. It's a good challenge to have because, as I said, there's no walking away from it. If you're in an organization or you have an organization, you've got people. And if you've got people, you want to look after them because, as I said, it's the human thing to do. But beyond that, they're going to be the ones that are going to be the difference between you being a good, bad, average, or an excellent organization.
I love it. Absolutely love that. I wanted to get your thoughts on, because this is obviously a 2025 prediction sort of piece. It's a nice simple question for you. What do you think HR can do better or differently as a general profession into 2025?
I will go down the angle of starting at the beginning is our operating models and structures. I think that's where I look at it and go, that's kind of the root of quite a few problems. If we can get that right and say to people, look, here's how we operate as HR, it's who we are, what we do, and here's how we're set up to do that. If we get that really right, it helps a long way. And obviously, it's not just about the start. We need to adapt, evolve that. And I think that's the second bit to it, that if we start off right, brilliant. But as things change around you, when things get better, bigger or worse, and you have to downsize, if we can adapt to that, that's the key. I would say that's where, for me, the solutions lie. And that's a big picture piece. But the moment we start saying we need more professional development, fine, you'll get that professional development. Where's the time going to come from for you to do that? And what's that going to achieve? For me, you bring it right back to the beginning. It's your operating models and your structures. If you're set up right and you're clear on what you do and why you do it and how you do it, big step in the right direction. And then when you go to the organization and say, we want to get involved in the organizational design and help your business transform, you've got the basis there. If you've got it right, we've got the resource, we've got the way to do it. Here's how we're going to help you. But if you go in and there's no rhyme or reason, it's, oh, we can help you with that. It's like, okay, but where do you come into this? And then you have to do that journey anyway. So for me, that is the one piece I would say that we don't get to spend enough time, because often we walk into the workplace, the structure is normally there and we go, all right, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to keep as it is because it's been working. And the operating model, we don't really use that, all the theory behind it and the science behind operating models. We don't spend enough time on it. We just go gung-ho, here's our strategy and here's what we're going to be doing. Here's recruitment and workforce planning, and we go ahead with that. This piece I've been quite keen on this year. We've been doing quite a bit of work on something called HR 3.0, which is a look at what the future of HR models need to be and look like without pigeonholing people saying this is the answer. It's a really interesting piece of work led by Perry Timms. It's something I've looked at over again. And when we did it at a conference, it really opened my eye that how many people were sitting there wanting to know more, but also saying we're struggling with this, or how does that fit in with that? People operating models and structures are the one thing. I think for 2025, give yourself a bit of time just to have a look at it and go, actually, is this what we need? Is this going to do what we need it to do for the next year, 2 years? That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I really, really like that. We've been running a campaign earlier in the year around demystifying operating models, depending on the type of business that you are, depending on your business drivers, depending on how you operate, size, industry. There's so many different factors into it that impact the operating model. Really interesting stuff to hear about HR 3.0. Is there any more? So you said you're doing some work on that. When's that due to be released?
You could go and click on the PTHR website and see what that model looks like. We did a joint conference session just last month on it. It's out there to be used. The premise behind it is almost a guide. You take what you want from it and what you think is good from it and adapt it and use it. But it's a way of looking at it in a very different way, from a kind of product place, bringing the marketing world into it as well, bringing that product piece into it, bringing systems thinking behind it. There's a different edge to it, more speaking to less HR-y and more business focused. What I liked about it was it's almost agility in that it's not a here's the solution, it's a here's a way. Take what you want, tell us what's not so good, and see how it works for you.
Absolutely brilliant. Really, really good. We are out of time, unfortunately. That's gone so quickly because I feel like there's probably a bunch more questions that we can ask you. I'm going to ask you one more question, though, before we wrap up. You did talk about people analytics, and I think this is quite an interesting one. We obviously have a team that work on consulting from a people analytics perspective. But from your side into next year, what do you think the big step change is going to be in that space?
I think the one is obviously the AI. The HR systems we're using, if they haven't done already, are introducing AI into their systems and offering that as an additional product or service. So I think that's happening. And most of us, I'd hope, have a HR system of some sort in place. I think that's one thing that's going to happen in the analytics sphere. The other thing I think is there's not a huge number of HR professionals that are experts in people analytics. And I say that with humility. That's the actual case. So I think we've all got to do some work in that, either bring in the expertise or develop ourselves to be better. That kind of analytics piece, the storytelling piece, and linking people analytics to organizational performance. How can we bridge that link? So whatever industry you're in, how can you say your learning actually went as far as impacting the bottom line of either helping your customers or providing a service? That for me is where the magic of HR is, when we can start to say our recruitment led to an increase in sales. Oh, well, how did they do that? Well, we recruited 10 new salespeople who were actually really good. And as a result, they bring in 100 grand more profit. That for me is where it's a hard place to get to. But from an analytics point of view, if you can map that journey of that step change of we did one bit here, and how did that have a knock-on effect all the way there? So I find that's a really good piece of work to do, not only from a celebratory point of view of how far our work goes, but just from an engagement point of view as well. When you can say to people, actually, you didn't just, for example, recruit a person. You actually did much more than that, because this person went on to do this, this, and this for the organization, for society, for the community. It really does run deep. There was a really good piece. It was by Geffen Nadin, who leads on a lot of things around benefits and well-being. It was actually saying the social impact of HR initiatives. When we do something around sickness management, it actually helps someone's health. You've improved their health. So when you give them 24-hour GP access, rather than them waiting 3 months on the NHS, you've just given them access to a doctor and helped them with their own health. So I think in the analytics bit, I'm keen on linking the people bit to the organizational performance bit and really finding value in that. The third piece is how we develop ourselves or bring in that expertise. Data's flying around in our organizations, outside, in our phones, on advertising boards, everywhere. How do we harness that? We either develop ourselves or bring in the expertise is what I'd say is the challenge for 2025.
Yeah, I really like that. Data means nothing unless you've got a story to tell and something to link it back to. There are certain points. It's almost the 6 degrees of separation type thing. But ultimately, you need to be able to paint that picture and tell that story. Idris, amazing to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been great to just chew the fat with you.
Brilliant. No, it's been really good. And thanks for having me on, Chris.
Absolutely loved having you on. People want to follow you. I take it it's just on LinkedIn. It's Idris Arshad, and they can catch you. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's podcast as much as I have enjoyed recording it. You can get access to all of our podcasts on our website. If you go to lacepartners.co.uk/podcast, you can find that. Or if you just search for HR on the Offensive across any of the channels that you get podcasts in, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're on Amazon as well. So just search for HR on the Offensive and we'll be there. But from myself and from Idris, thank you very much for joining us again. And hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.